And welcome to Pacifica Performance Showcase, Arts and Culture to enlighten, enliven, and educate. I'm your host, Donna Walker, and today it's my pleasure to welcome into studio filmmaker, composer, multifaceted talent, Cyril Morin.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're actually here on the occasion of the DVD release of
Blu-ray release
of a trilogy of films that, interestingly enough, revolve around the American condition. And yet you are a Frenchman. You work both sides of the pond. You're both LA-based and Paris-based. What prompted you, first of all, to focus on the American psyche as opposed to the French or European?
So first of all, since I'm a kid, I was always in the American culture, with the music, with the literature, and of course with the cinema. So I always grow up with this sound, if I may say that. And for me, it was very natural when I came here. Everything was very natural. Even the city, even driving in Los Angeles, we even meeting all my American friends, part of me is coming from this culture, but also I'm European. I think what is very interesting, it's a mix of the two, by the way.
Well, it's interesting because your background, I was surprised to find out, is really as a composer was how you really made your name initially. So was this writing, producing, directing always kind of a goal for you? Was it something you always envisioned further down the line?
Yes and no, because I started as a composer and I was also a big film fan, you know. So one day someone say, "Oh, your music fits well with the movie," and here we go. I started to be a film composer. So I thought about doing a film here and there, and I did a couple of things in the 90s. But then after working on a higher level as a film composer, I decided, no, it's not for me. It's a real work, etc. But one day, after a kind of burnout, too much work, you know, too much music, too much film, etc. I decided to develop my own projects. And then someone told me, "But why don't you direct this movie?" And I said, "No." But after a week, I came back and I said, "Yes, I'm going to do it." I really enjoy it, and my goal was to do the next one. And I always had in the back of my mind to do 3 movies. I don't know why, because I knew I will maybe go back to Europe eventually, and it would be like a kind of a package of film that I had done in the same budget, same kind of stories. But I'm always was fascinating about the American culture and the American history.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, in looking at your resume and, of course, the eternal source IMDb, I mean, you know, it's pretty impressive as a composer. I mean, there are many, many things that, you know, are very, very well known. And a lot of people might just say, "Hey, I've made it in this business, in this particular niche. Why not just stay there? You got it good." So you're kind of taking a risk by entering this whole new arena. It's not old, but it's new for you being at the helm in all capacities.
It's true, and it was a challenge, and it's still a challenge. But, you know, I'm a creative person. I need to do stuff. I don't know how, I don't know when. I mean, when is all the time, maybe, you know, obviously. But I need to do something and to express something. So I have big time in my life, like every 10 years, I'm doing something differently. So far it was in the music field. So now, since 5 years or so, I started to go in the writing, filming. But I like the challenge, and it's interesting to see. When I was an adolescent, I wanted to do many, many things. But when you do a movie, you have to do many, many things. And you go back to what is writing, music. I think directing actors is very close to conduct musicians. And also, even the drawing that I was doing when I was an adolescent is there for the movie. So for me, it was a way to reunite a big kind of arts in a way, you know. So it was natural, I have to say.
Well, and let's focus on this project. It's called an American Trilogy. It's composed of 3 different films, and they're done chronologically. And we'll get into each specific one in a moment. But basically, it involves, the first one takes place in the 70s and revolves around AIM and the situation at Pine Ridge. And then you focus on New York in the 80s, kind of at the beginning of the AIDS crisis in New York. And then more contemporary, more recent, The Hacker's Game, which involves a hacker and the corporate culture and corporate crime. So these are each in and of themselves are pretty big topics. So to take on all three, why these particular topics and what was the inception of this particular project? Were they filmed chronologically or what was the logistics of it?
It wasn't filmed chronologically. I didn't at first have this vision of having three big topics like this. It came little by little. But for me, it's starting in America, but it's totally universal. There is nothing we can't share with the other side of the world. So it's starting here because I like, again, the culture. I like the American actors. I like the American set and the vision. But it talks to everybody. I think the Native American, when you go in Europe, it's quite big. It's part of all the children play that, like cowboy Indians. But for me, when I was a kid, I wanted to be the Indian all the time. So,
so you probably always lost.
Yeah, but I was pride, and,
right.
I had a soul.
Well, indigenous people, as you say, throughout the world, whether it's, the Aboriginal situation in Australia or Maoris, I mean, it's all over the world. There are indigenous people and the clashing of cultures. So this particular one does seem so American in its essence, though, and certainly Wounded Knee and Pine Ridge and is more relevant than ever because we're dealing with Standing Rock and all these pipelines which are going directly through what should be and what has been promised to be Native American land, and not just damaging the people, but of course the resources, which impinges on everybody, this takeover. So it does have, I think, an extra resonance right now,
Absolutely.
Maybe even more. And in relation to AIDS, of course, we take a lot for granted with the drugs, the treatments. People are living longer. It's not automatically a death sentence. But you focus on a time when it really was not known what was this gay cancer, as it was termed. And at that time, it was a death sentence, and there was a lot of fear. And then coming up to the hacking situation, of course, we're right in the middle in this country,
Absolutely,
vis-a-vis our elections of the Russian hacking story. So I would think, I don't know what your timeline was on the making of all these films, but it must also be, I guess, unfortunately gratifying that they are so much in the current.
Now, first of all, these three projects are very close to me. Again, when I was going back to the activist, I was 6 years old, but I remember the photos in the newspaper in Europe about the insurrection. So it was familiar to me, and I know a little bit of the Native American history, so it was very natural to me to speak about this project, and also a little bit of the American politics. And this to show you that for how important is American politics for a European. And when you believe me, the last couple of weeks, I was in Italy, I was in Paris, and it was all about the politics here in the States. So it has a major influence. So that's why when you go into it, you speak about it, you feel you know a little bit about it. Then NY84, about the starting of AIDS, it's also about my youth. I was in Paris, but it was a little bit the same kind of life. It's a very free vision of the relationship of the artist at the time, and especially I was very much influenced by Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe. But it's a free inspiration. But AIDS, I mean, it started probably in the Caribbean, and it came to San Francisco, New York, and then it came to Europe. And we forget a lot about this time, and we forget about the lesson of this time. I thought when Ebola was starting, the same things, the rejection of the people was exactly the same. AIDS, there is 35 million people who died about AIDS, and there are still 35 million who have the AIDS in the world. So it's an American topics, but it's a worldwide topics.
Well, and let's talk about, just briefly, synopsize the plot of this film. You do focus not just solely on that, and they're not documentaries, let's just make that clear. They're fictional films, but NY84 focuses on 3 friends, artists, who have kind of found their soul connection with each other. And they're young, they're carefree. Of course, at that age, you think nothing's going to harm you. It's kind of a sketchy world they're dabbling in. There's partying, there's drugs, lots of sex. No hint that anybody's ever going to die, because that's part of that age too, you know. So talk about, as you said, and I thought immediately of Robert Mapplethorpe and Patti Smith, because one of the characters is a photographer, one's a singer-songwriter, the other's a kind of an artist,
Graffiti
muralist, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Close to Keith Haring. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's a little bit of the Truffaut inspiration with Julie Jim. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's a mix. But I remember this life in Paris, it was more about being someone, being an artist. Of course, you could enjoy life. But what I like with my character is that they want to do something. And eventually they will. I like also the process of the woman with her 2 friends, played by Sam Quartin. And she using, in a way, she's going through a drama with her 2 friends dying. And that's how she becomes a singer. And that's how she can write her lyrics. She can say something. And what is important is not going through a drama. It's how you go further away of a drama. How you make your own life with leaving people behind you. Basically, that's what the story is about. It's interesting. I hope it's interesting to see that in the 3 movies, I shouldn't say that, but there is a kind of a sacrifice, you know. But the sacrifice always means something. Mm-hmm. The sacrifice is to make a statement in your life, because someone sacrificed life, then you have to use it for the future. And that's also the purpose of my 3 films.
And I do think the joy of sort of a European approach to filmmaking, I think Europeans aren't compelled to come up with a happy ending all the time. You know, American films, you're almost always required to have everything wrapped up in a nice, neat box at the end. And, of course, everybody's happy. And we know life isn't like that. So, you know, I think that informs your filmmaking a little bit too.
You know, I'm very much influenced by the film of the 70s, and in a way, the first film I started to shoot, The Activist, was in the 70s and an homage to 70s actors and films. So, of course, I'm a big fan of Sidney Lumet. I have a chance 2 weeks ago to say hi to Mr. Al Pacino. And
I just saw him on stage, by the way, out at Pasadena Playhouse.
Wonderful.
Magnificent, yeah.
Yeah, I saw him in New York in the Merchant of Venice, yeah. I say, what can I say? You're my favorite actor ever. There is nothing else to say.
That is the best.
Anyway, but they are a big influence on my work. So usually when you look at all the movies of the 70s, there is no happy end. And, you know, I like that. Mostly my story end up like this. And I know if one day I'm doing something more commercial, I'll be able to do the happy end. But I like this sad end with the idea of, okay, what we're going to do next? What is the future?
Just sort of backtracking a little bit to The Activist, there's a couple of a sheriff and a sheriff's deputy that are involved. A couple of Native Americans are imprisoned for disorderly conduct and assault, and this is coming out of the Nixon era. So we're dealing with wiretaps and leaks and, of course, corruption. You talked a little bit about what compelled you to tell that story, but I noticed that in all 3 films you do use some of the same actors. Did you kind of look at this as sort of an ensemble that you drew from?
It's a little bit like a stage group, you know. I like to use some actors doing a cameo in one or another film. I really like working with them, by the way, and they bring a lot to the story, to the picture, and especially because it was a small budget, we spent a lot of time before the shooting. The shooting was fast, the 3 times, you know. But we spent a lot of time and to develop the character, to develop the project. So we end up being friends. There were some actors I wish I will work with them again, you know, and bring them on board in the next movies. We really develop a kind of work. And I want to speak especially with Chris Schillinger, who plays the activist that I shot before NY84. Mm-hmm. I was a little bit tough on him pushing him to be into the character. But then the second one, when he was on board for NY84, it just came up with a brilliant interpretation of artists at the time, gay artists. We did that work because we worked first together and we did a second film, and we have to go further away,
Right, so that trust develops with each
absolutely
time of working together. And then that brings us to Hacker's Game, which one couldn't help but think of Aaron Swartz. That was the first thing I thought of.
It's a good call because it's exactly this. Mm-hmm. I get some article talking about Snowden or Julian Assange. It has nothing to do with that. Mm-hmm. It's about young hacker who suddenly is found dead in his hotel room. Right. It's happened not only for Aaron Swartz, but it's happened to another one. Yes, it's how one single man in his room can try to change the world or society or to help us to have a vision of what's going on. Now I'm skeptical of some organization about what they do, especially the last U.S. election. Yeah, there is some group who I think they are not disciplined. And nowadays there is a big misinformation. So when I shot the movie, which was 2 or 3 years ago, there was kind of this idea of the whistleblower and for a purpose, to help the people to watch and see the reality. But nowadays I'm more skeptical because there is a lot of manipulation. That's exactly the concern I have with Hacker's Game, is how do you read the information? And believe me, for me it started to be very hard to read Facebook and read all the articles. I come from a generation who used to read all the newspapers to recoup information. And because we are on air, I want to tell the audience that it's very important not to go too fast to information. It's very important to read, to recoup, to make sure what you think before posting something on Facebook, and not just having the emotional reaction that they want you to have. And I think that's why we go wrong right now with information on every side. And I'm concerned about that.
There's a whole new set of rules that there are no rules, basically. It's kind of the Wild West electronically.
If I may, I learn fast information sounds the end of the democracy. Mm-hmm. If you don't have time to write your article, if you don't have time to read it, then it is less democracy. So that's a little bit of my warning in Hacker's Game, but I think it's much worse today after 3 years.
And also, to a certain degree, the anonymity that goes along with it. People, to my mind, have become much more cruel, much more sort of divorced from reality in a way, because they're so engaged in this little electronic device that they have. It's very discouraging for me, I have to tell you. I have a real hard time with the cell phone obsession.
Yeah, first of all, you're not going to change the world with a like.
Right.
And second, it's mean nothing. And
right.
Second, yes, it's not because you're alone in your room that it's allowed to be so aggressive, and because you share what you think with other people. So it's very important that you take the time. You take the time for your reaction if you want to have one. Personally, I try not to have any reaction. I rather put this in a movie or in my work than on Facebook,
And also, I think the fact that we are so easily manipulated, and I think our recent elections in this country speak to that, because for me, it's hard to believe that so many would buy into this, let alone the hacking, the other concerns. But that it almost seems like a collective, I don't know, hysteria, a collective delusion, certainly. And people are easily manipulated. We don't always like to admit that, but we are.
It's a very easy time for manipulation, very easy. So you have to read again, recoup information. I think that's what you have to do. And accept the information is not fast.
Yes.
The fact can be fast, but the analysis takes time.
Yes, exactly. And let alone any introspection or mulling something over. In this age, a lot of people meditate, a lot of people manage to find a way to de-stress, but there isn't to my mind, a lot of introspection about things. And I think that's equally important, just to take a moment and think, who am I? Why am I here? How do I really feel? What makes me happy? How are we interconnected? We don't take a lot of time to really do that.
But also, I think this is a role of being an artist
Yes.
and art in general. And not only that, I mean, you have doctors, you have nurses, or professor who are so important for our life. But I think by being an artist, you can, you have a responsibility to show something to an audience, and you have to deliver something that you have, where you have a real connection first, and also that you control, you know what you're talking about. And we are in a world who are not too much in control, and lots of people doesn't know what they talk about, you know. So if you look at the three movies, you won't have any answer or any good comment from a very daily casual press, I would say. You have to get a bit deeper into archives, into the past, into the history, and that's a good way to make your own opinion.
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about this trilogy of films. Again, my in-studio guest is Cyril Morin.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And it's called An American Trilogy. It's now on Blu-ray. It's done really well on the festival circuit. You've got really some really, really nice quotes here. IndieWire, A Unique Romance, L.A. Splash, Beautifully Captured, Winter Indie Fest Awards, so many things.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
It's a Blu-ray release. There will also some DVDs, but all the film are separately on iTunes, Google Play, so not necessarily under the trilogy. But if you go and type Cyril Morin on iTunes, and you will find it, of course.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for me too.
Safe travels. I understand you're off to Paris.